Hi, I'm Joe Graydon.
I'm Terry Graydon. Welcome to this podcast of the People's Pharmacy, where we bring you the stories behind the health headlines.
This podcast is brought to you by Redix Industries, makers of Utterly Smooth Body Cream. 800-345-7339, on the web at uttercream.com. People have been keeping bees for thousands of years. In addition to the honey, products of the hive have been used for healing. This is the People's Pharmacy with Terry and Joe Graydon.
Most of us fear bee stings because they hurt, but some people will go a long way to get stung. Apitherapy uses the power of bee venom to ease inflammation. Lady Sorelli is a certified beekeeper and apitherapist.
Come on, babies, talk to us.
Coming up on the People's Pharmacy, find out how bees can help us heal.
First, this news.
In the People's Pharmacy health headlines, vegetable oils, also known as polyunsaturated fatty acids or PUFAs, may not be as healthy as nutrition experts once thought. For decades, people have been told to cook with corn, safflower, or sunflower oil to lower their cholesterol levels and risk of heart disease. But a new analysis of old data just published in the BMJ is throwing doubt on that dogma. The original research, called the Minnesota Coronary Experiment, was conducted over 5 years beginning in 1968. It was a double-blind randomized trial. That design is rare for dietary studies, partly because it's so hard to implement. Those assigned to the intervention were fed a diet lower in saturated fat than the average American diet of the time. They were given more corn oil to compensate. The control group was given a typical American diet with the usual amounts of butter and meat as sources of saturated fat. Investigators Ivan France and Ansel Keys followed up on participants' cholesterol levels and conducted autopsies on those who died. They never published their results, however.
More than 3 decades later, a new analysis of the original data shows that corn oil did lower cholesterol levels, but it did not lower the death rate. Older participants were actually more likely to die during the study time frame if they were in the corn oil group. Even more alarming, those in the intervention group were more likely to show signs of a heart attack than those eating more saturated fat. There was no difference in clogged arteries between groups. These results are consistent with those from an Australian study conducted around the same time. The investigators were able to analyze the previously unpublished data from that one, termed the Sydney Diet Heart Study. Those data also showed no survival advantage for people consuming corn oil instead of the more common forms of saturated fat such as bacon or butter.
The U.S. Preventive Services Task Force has made a controversial recommendation with respect to aspirin for heart disease prevention. For years, the evidence has shown that people who take aspirin lower their risk of heart attacks but increase their chances of bleeding ulcers or bleeding strokes. Balancing the benefits and the risks can be complicated, and the task force has made a rather complex recommendation. It suggests that people in their 50s or 60s at high risk of heart disease benefit from taking aspirin, perhaps just one low-dose tablet a day. As a side benefit, those on such a regimen also lower their risk of colorectal cancer. People with a life expectancy less than 10 years probably won't benefit from taking aspirin, and those with bleeding disorders or a history of ulcers should avoid it.
Beans are said to be good for the heart, but could legumes also help people control their weight? A new analysis of data from 21 clinical trials suggests that even when the diet is not designed for weight loss, people eating pulses like beans, peas, or lentils lost a little bit more weight than those on the control non-bean diets. The difference was very small, only about 3/4 of a pound, so it's not likely that beans will star in the next fad diet. Still, legumes are low in glycemic index and help people control their blood sugar. Diets containing beans are also associated with lower cholesterol levels. The researchers point out that the studies they analyzed only lasted from 4 to 12 weeks and urged that long-term effects of legumes in the diet be studied.
Phthalates are chemicals used in cosmetics, food packaging, plastics, and many other modern materials. We don't usually think of them in food since they have no nutritive value. Indeed, phthalates are considered endocrine disruptors that may interfere with hormones. Data from the National Health and Nutrition Examination Study, or NHANES, show that Americans who eat more fast food have significantly higher levels of phthalates in their urine. There are many different phthalates. One, DINP, was found at levels 39% higher in the urine of people who ate the most fast food, compared to those who had not eaten any fast food recently. Researchers do not know whether this exposure is something we should all worry about, but it is another disadvantage to a diet heavy in fast foods. And that's the health news from the People's Pharmacy this week. Welcome to the People's Pharmacy. I'm Joe Graydon.
And I'm Terry Graydon. Humans and bees have been interacting for thousands of years. The relationship goes way beyond honey. What did our ancestors know about bees that could be helpful to us?
For more information about the art of apitherapy, we turn to Dr. Andrew Koken. He's director of the Institute for Healing Arts Research and past president of the American Apitherapy Society. The specialty of his practice is physical medicine and rehabilitation. He's been doing prolotherapy for 30 years and bee venom therapy for 25 years.
Welcome to the People's Pharmacy, Dr. Koken.
Thank you. Happy to be here.
Dr. Koken, it's nice to have you back on the People's Pharmacy. For our listeners, we need to tell them that you are a traditionally trained medical doctor, but you got interested in some unusual treatments quite a long time ago. Let's start initially with bee venom therapy, also known as apitherapy. How did you get interested, and do you ever use it?
I got interested because in my specialty of physical medicine and rehabilitation, we evaluate people for pain and how they've been treated in the past and maybe what we can do for them in the future. And I found that 30 years ago or 25 years ago when I started doing this, that the solutions that the established medical community had for a lot of the pain problems I was seeing were very insufficient. They gave them medication of some sort, tried to cover it up, and told them to go live their lives as best they could. I found that to be not satisfying for me professionally or personally. So I looked at alternatives, and I heard a lecture from another physician one time about using bee venom therapy for arthritis and post-herpetic neuralgia, which is a pain condition that happens after shingles, and there is no good medical treatment for it. And he said that this was almost curative. So I looked into it and started using it and found that indeed it did help the pain of post-herpetic neuralgia.
So you have found that to be true?
I have found that to be true. I did a case series that I presented at several meetings, about 14 patients, and how they did afterwards, where their pain levels went from 8 out of 10 down to 2 out of 10, and that lasted for years afterwards. And I have treated over 100 people with post-herpetic neuralgia since then, and they all, almost 100%, have gotten excellent relief of their pain. And the medical community hasn't really recognized this, although every once in a while in some journal or magazine you'll see a story about a person who's been stung by a bunch of bees and their pain went away or their arthritis went away.
Well, speaking of that kind of story, Dr. Koken, I have to tell you, we've actually received a number of reports from people who were minding their own business. You know, they were like on the porch, in the rocking chair, fast asleep, relaxing on a nice warm day. And then all of a sudden they were awakened, rudely awakened, by a sharp pain. A bee or a stinging insect of some sort or another had gotten them on, maybe on the toe or maybe on the hand. And at first they were outraged because the pain was so excruciating and it was so sudden. But then to their amazement, over the next couple of days, their arthritis pain went away. Now, it didn't last forever, but for them, it was such an extraordinary situation that they felt compelled to let us know on our website, and we've shared it with other people. And although this is not science, a lot of your colleagues would say, well, you know, that's anecdotal. But for that person, it was profound.
There are a lot of reports like that, and actually I have 3 patients over the last several years who, when I mentioned bee venom therapy, they reported that they'd had relatives, older relatives that were maybe working out in the garden and had gotten stung by a bee, and their arthritis in their hands had gotten better. So they would go out once every couple of weeks and get stung on purpose to manage their arthritis in their hands. So that's not uncommon, and that's how, you know, the indigenous people of, a lot of countries around the world, they've been using bee venom therapy in China for 4,000 years. People find out about this by accident, and then they propagate it by telling other people.
It sounds like a sort of do-it-yourself apitherapy.
Well, it's a do-it-yourself treatment. It's home remedies.
And now, speaking of stories, there is a story that has been circulating on the internet about a woman who was preparing to die from Lyme disease and who was attacked by a bunch of Africanized bees, I think. And, of course, figured in the immediate aftermath of the attack that she would surely die, but instead her Lyme disease essentially went away. Is there any explanation for that? Is it a credible story?
Well, it's definitely a credible story. There is a Dr. Dietrich Klinghardt who has written about this and actually uses bee venom therapy in his protocol for treating Lyme disease. And I don't treat Lyme disease personally, but I've talked to other practitioners and patients who are using bee venom to kill the Lyme bacteria. It's not an automatic sort of thing, and it takes a long time. But in her case, she got a big dose of bee venom, and it does affect the immune system. There are some very strong scientific literature that has been done over the last 5 years that shows that bee venom is a very strong anti-inflammatory. It affects inflammation at the genomic transcription level, and that just means that it stops the process of inflammation very early in the whole process. So that is a known reaction in certain circles of alternative medicine.
Dr. Kochen, a lot of your colleagues who are listening to us right now, physicians, nurse practitioners, physician's assistants, they're saying, where's the evidence? If this stuff really worked, there would be scientific articles. And I'm just not familiar with them. They weren't taught to me during my education. And so I'm just curious, is there any evidence, solid evidence, that would actually suggest that bee venom therapy can ease inflammation, particularly of something like osteoarthritis?
Well, actually, there have been books written since the 1850s about using bee venom as a anti-arthritis remedy. And the first book was, I think, in 1854. It was in Austria. And there have been other books written since then. And when it was brought to the United States, there were articles even in some of the major medical journals about a series of patients treated with bee venom for rheumatoid arthritis and other types of arthritis. They have kind of fallen out of favor with the pharmaceutical companies who have come up with drugs that they can make profit from, since you really can't patent bee venom. And although they've tried to break down the components of how it works and try to use individual components, it may be that it just requires the whole bee venom milieu of compounds. There's over 40 different bioactive chemicals in bee venom, so trying to separate those out and figure out what's doing what is very difficult.
So it sounds as though it's a lot more complicated than just a single drug.
It probably is. They have found that there's one component which comprises more than 50% of bee venom, called melatonin, has some antiviral properties and has very strong anti-inflammatory properties. And even at Washington University in St. Louis, they've taken pollen and put it in nanoparticles and attacked tumors with it. So there are people that are doing some basic research. The clinical studies are getting harder and harder to do because of all the restrictions that are being placed on people in terms of doing experiments on live people. So there are articles coming out and will be coming out in the future, but they're few and far between because there's no profit in it. There's nobody's going to make any money off of using venom.
Are there certain conditions for which we could reasonably expect that apitherapy would be useful?
Well, like I say, my own experience with postherpetic neuralgia is quite strong. I also have had success treating acute tendinitis like lateral epicondylitis, or more commonly known as tennis elbow. So those kind of acute injuries actually respond pretty well. Acute sprained ankles, I've had some success treating those. The most common use in the world of apitherapy is for multiple sclerosis. And there have been some small studies. There was one major study that was published in the Journal of Neurology from Europe, but the way that they did their study was very poorly designed and basically destined to fail. So we can't really rely on that. But there are a lot of people that have used bee venom to maintain themselves for many years, having multiple sclerosis. And I've treated people with, again, rheumatoid arthritis and other types of inflammatory arthropathies. It's been very helpful. I use bee venom also for treating scars. I have pictures of people that have had postoperative scarring, keloids that I've treated with bee venom, and it virtually makes the scarring disappear. Had people with burns that I've injected with bee venom, that the burn scars have flattened out, become non-painful, which is very important because a lot are very painful and they become not painful. And the scars almost, after a couple of years, almost disappear.
You're listening to Dr. Andrew Kogan, past president of the American Apitherapy Society and director of the Institute for Healing Arts Research. He practices physical medicine and rehabilitation and has been doing prolotherapy for 30 years and bee venom therapy for 25 years.
After the break, we'll find out what other aspects of apitherapy we should be aware of.
What are the products of the hive and how are they used?
We'll find out how bee venom therapy affects inflammation, and we'll talk with a beekeeper.
You're listening to The People's Pharmacy with Joe and Terry Graydon.
If you value the health information you get when you listen to The People's Pharmacy, consider subscribing to our email newsletter. You'll get the latest health news and information on upcoming podcasts delivered to your inbox twice a week. Look for the link at peoplespharmacy.com.
Welcome back to The People's Pharmacy. I'm Terry Graydon.
And I'm Joe Graydon. The People's Pharmacy is brought to you in part by Red X Industries, makers of utterly smooth creams and lotions that deeply moisturize to make dry skin feel soft and smooth. The number's 800 345-7339, online at uddercream.com.
And if you would like to order a CD of this show, you can call 800-732-2334. This is show number 1032. That number again, 800-732-2334. Online at peoplespharmacy.com.
Today on the People's Pharmacy, we're discussing how products of the hive can be used to promote healing. We're talking with Dr. Andrew Koken, Director of the Institute for Healing Arts Research and past President of the American Apitherapy Society. He practices physical medicine, rehabilitation, and prolotherapy in Los Angeles.
Dr. Koken, what other aspects of apitherapy should we be aware of?
Well, actually, apitherapy is quite a wide, diverse sort of subject. It includes the medicinal use of all the bee products, or the products of the hive, we call it: honey, pollen, propolis, royal jelly. And there are a lot of those that are becoming actually quite popular in usage and more commonly used, specifically honey. There's a specific honey called medihoney, which is manuka honey that has been irradiated, unfortunately, to kill off some of its properties, but is FDA approved for treating wounds. And there's a whole raft of literature supporting the use of honey. I've used it. I used it to close a wound in a gunshot victim. I go down to Honduras periodically and treat people down there with another one of my medical modalities, but a woman came in that had been shot through the abdomen, and 2 years later she was still draining small bowel contents through the skin in her back because she had developed a fistula, which is a communication between the bowel and the outside, and she'd had 2 surgeries to close it, and it wouldn't close, and she came to our clinic. So I suggested that she take a little small syringe of honey, get some honey from the local beekeeper, and just inject it from the skin back into the small bowel. And after 3 months, this closed completely, and she was very happy with the results. And I've used it to clean up abscesses, post-surgical abscesses, just rinsing out the abscess once a day with raw honey. Important not to have honey that's been filtered too much or heated too high. You know, when you put honey in your tea, if your tea is over 104 degrees, you're killing off all the good medicinal properties of honey. So you should keep the tea a little bit cooler or let it cool off a little bit before you put honey in it. The other products of the hive we use is pollen. I've used pollen to desensitize patients from pollen allergies and hay fever. The allergy community is just becoming aware of oral desensitization as a technique. In fact, I just heard on the news a week or two ago that they're recommending that small children who are likely to have peanut allergies should now get small doses of peanuts orally as they're growing up to desensitize them. Mm-hmm. So this is not something that was accepted by the medical community, but now is being seen as being useful. So pollen, starting out with low doses and slowly increasing, can be helpful for hay fever. And I've had other doctors try it, and now their whole office is using pollen for desensitizing them against hay fever. It's also been used for radiation sickness to decrease the nausea and loss of hair and inflammation and fatigue from radiation sickness, along with honey and royal jelly. All seem to have some mitigating effects for radiation sickness.
Well, it certainly sounds as though we really should be paying close attention to the bees and helping them stay healthy so they can help us.
That would be a really good idea.
Dr. Andrew Koken, thank you so much for talking with us on the People's Pharmacy today.
Thank you. It's happy to be here.
You've been listening to Dr. Andrew Koken, Director of the Institute for Healing Arts Research and past President of the American Apitherapy Society. He practices physical medicine, rehabilitation, and prolotherapy in Los Angeles.
We turn now to a certified beekeeper who uses products of the hive for healing. Lady Sorelli is a certified apitherapist and president of the Bee Healing Guild. We visited her and her hives in the mountains of North Carolina.
This is my oldest hive here. She's about 40 years old. 40 years? 5 years? I don't remember now. I'll have to check my notes. But these are my girls. I don't name the hives. And I have a mouthpiece vacuum type thing that I use when I go to get my bees for therapy. When they see that coming, it's almost like each generation trains the other one, or passes on the knowledge. Because when they see it coming, I've got to have my jacket on. And it's like the same thing. Oh, here she comes again. She's going to get one of us. So, I get about 4 or 5 at a time. It's okay, ladies.
We're talking with Lady Sorelli. She owns and operates Bee Healing Apiary in Spring Community near Hot Springs, North Carolina, where she raises resistant stock bees. We joined her on her porch to find out about how she uses products of the hive for healing.
Welcome to the People's Pharmacy, Lady Sorelli.
Thank you kindly. You honor me.
Lady, why don't you just tell us a little bit about your background, how you would like us to introduce you, please?
Well, actually, I don't know if you call me a Renaissance woman, but I usually take care or address whatever issues the universe puts before me. And thus far, most of my life, that's in terms of healing in different modalities, first by experience and then by sharing that through education. And right now, I received my master herbology a while back, and I'm also right now a certified apitherapist. And I cannot imagine a more beautiful way of combining the two since one comes from the other. So that is part of what I teach. And I do not, as a rule, teach anything that I myself have not experienced personally, because I need to understand it first before I can share it.
Lady, how in the world did you get interested in apitherapy?
The bees. The bees have taught me how to live, how to communicate, how to heal. And actually, after a flashback, I discovered a school. Everything works by synergy, and I attended the school, and everything is just history from there. I became a slow food delegate. I'm an ambassador for the Center for Honeybee Research. And whatever the bees teach me or communicate to me, I in turn turn around and teach to the humans.
Lady, tell us a little bit about this amazing place that we are in.
Spring Creek?
Yeah, tell us. It's a peaceful, healing place.
I didn't realize how healing it was to others who came until I did the directory for our community. I was amazed at the number of artists we have in our area that are hiding. And they're also healed. Anybody that comes here out of the area, they come to heal. And pretty much they do just that. And they end up becoming self-employed. There's something in these mountains that seeks into your soul. And listening to the creek, you can almost hear it chuckling over the places that it has passed or where the waters come from. You can hear the wind and have it speak of past voices. And every day it's different. I see 5 ranges off my front porch with my coffee. Every morning the mood is different. And I usually go with it.
Tell us about using the products of the hive for healing. What products are used?
All of them. You have the beeswax that I teach to make suppositories and boluses for. You have the royal jelly, and you can combine 2 products of the hive to substitute the royal jelly, but you get nearly all the same properties. We also have the propolis, which is derived from the trees. The propolis is what the bees use to keep their hives healthy. We also have the larva that I teach in Apilarno. We also have honey, which is magical all by itself. Even man to this day does not know everything that's in honey or how it can be preserved for like 10 to 25,000 years and not go bad, not spoil. Everything in the hive is used, everything.
You mentioned royal jelly. What is that?
The royal jelly is created by the nurse bees and is fed to the queen her entire life, but it's also fed to the eggs the first 3 days of their lives. After the fourth day, they become a larva, and that's when they're fed the bee pollen and the honey.
Lady, tell us a little bit more about apitherapy. What is it? How does it work? How have you used it? How have you learned the details? And give us a sense of what it does for the people who come here.
Apitherapy is defined as apa, meaning bee, therapy, healing. Therapy coming from the Latin word. But a lot of people tend to confuse it with bee venom therapy. And it's actually, apitherapy is more than that. Bee venom is considered apipuncture, which is bee venom therapy based on the meridian lines of acupuncture. And it's also called bee venom therapy. I learned by that. Shortly after I placed my first hive, I was arrogant and I dropped some frames, and they came at me. They were angry, not that I blamed them, and I was stung 40 times. The next day, I was down with a low-grade fever. A few days later, I came down my bank and broke both bones in my right leg, and one needed a spiral break and needed to have bolts and plate, which I refused. So over the course of the next 8 weeks at the VA hospital, they would do x-rays every 2 weeks. And on the 8th week, the orthopedic surgeon was going through the pictures on the computer and asking him what's wrong. He says, I don't think I've got the right patient here, the right pictures. I said, what do you mean? He said, look at these. The latest ones had far less arthritis than the ones 8 weeks previous. And I said, well, honey, that's called bee venom therapy. He says, you mean it really works? I said, you're looking at it. So that's what got me started. And so I started doing my research. And it didn't take long to where I started using it on my friends. And I use, especially on the face. And I learned micro stings, where you take the stinger out, and instead of making one full sting, I can make upwards of 24 different stings off one stinger. And that's usually used around the face or in certain applications on healing. When you don't want the full sting, you want to sort of spread it out. And everything else is just history. The bees teach me. They teach me what works and what doesn't.
What would you use bee stings for on the face?
Sometimes I use them for the wrinkles. I'm not into vanity, but a lot of other folks are. But a lot of people have had melanoma surgery, and they have scars. And the bee stings will help to soften the scars, if not help them disappear altogether. And that's because it breaks down the scar tissue, and in the breaking down, it regenerates to a better state.
I was interested to hear you say that you use micro amounts of the venom so that a single stinger could provide 24 different injections, for example, because I'm very much aware that anytime a bee stings you, it's giving up its life.
Yes, there's a form of micro sting where the bee does not give up its life, and that's using the micro mesh. And I've yet to be able to use it, but then I found out there are two different types of micro mesh. You put the bee on the mesh, and the stinger goes through the little tiny holes, and then you pick the mesh and the bee up, and she keeps the stinger. But when I was trying to justify my feelings of killing a bee in the communication that I have on the spiritual level I have with the bees, it's okay, because their lifespan at the time that I'm using the stings, they only lived about 28 weeks anyway. And when you're speaking in terms of thousands. And also, too, is that Mother Nature has a way of balancing out the products and the animals that she has on the earth and how we can work synergistically with them. The honeybee is the only animal that I have found that offers everything from the hive for healing everything in the hive and the animals and the humans themselves. So I honor the bee every time I do a stinging session by offering a prayer when I put their bodies in water, and then so that they will not suffer, and then I take them out and do ceremony after the session. So it's I no longer have issues with them dying because they're going to anyway. I'm just using them for healing in the meantime.
Here we are on your front porch, and we hear the bees, we hear the birds. It's beautiful. It's peaceful. It's quite amazing.
It is. It is. This is my heart. This is my home. These I cannot imagine living anywhere else, and I don't care how far I travel to the big cities. This is the reason why I stay here.
Lady Sorelli, I wonder if you can tell us a little bit about how bee venom therapy affects inflammation. We know, of course, that inflammation is part of what underlies arthritis pain, but it also underlies a lot of other conditions.
The melatonin, which is about 52% in bee venom, is what the healing product in the venom itself. When you are stung, your body releases cortisol from the adrenal glands, and that pretty much acts like inflammation in your joints. That helps to take care of the inflammation created by the sting itself. Okay, and the sting itself, this reason why between micro and full sting, the full sting will create a large adverse reaction. You can, if you hit a point, a pressure point or a trigger point, you can see the actual redness of the skin, the venom traveling up the skin or the arm or the leg or wherever. And in micros, you can actually spread it out where you want it to go. So what it does is that it works with the body in that the melatonin is creating the sudden reaction to the inflammation in the joint or in the immune system, wherever. And the adrenal gland, the cortisol, helps to come and heal that as well. They work together. They don't really know exactly why or how that it works, other than the fact that in the creating the inflammation, you are pulling on the triggers of your own body defense mechanisms.
Now, obviously, people who are allergic to bee stings can't have this kind of therapy. Are there other things that people need to do to check about allergies before they use other beehive products?
We always have our people check the allergies for themselves prior to the actual apitherapy itself. They can do that by taking a grain of pollen under the tongue, 1 grain at a time. And if they react to that, then they know they can't take anything else, including honey. If they don't react to that, then they build that up to almost a tablespoon per day, at which point, probably halfway through it, you know you're not going to have any reaction to any bee products.
You're listening to Lady Sorelli, owner of the Bee Healing Apiary in Spring Creek near Hot Springs, North Carolina. She's president of the Bee Healing Guild. She's a certified beekeeper and a certified apitherapist.
After the break, we'll find out about the combination of apitherapy with acupuncture.
How long have people been using apitherapy?
Learn what types of conditions can be treated with bee venom therapy.
Is there any difference in the pain from an intentional bee sting compared to an accidental one?
We'll also find out how Lady Sorelli keeps her bees healthy and how honey is used for wound care.
You're listening to The People's Pharmacy with Joe and Terry Graydon. If you're enjoying this People's Pharmacy podcast, why not head over to our website where you'll find a wealth of information on medications, conditions, home remedies, and ways to keep yourself healthy. You'll find it all at peoplespharmacy.com.
Welcome back to the People's Pharmacy. I'm Joe Graydon.
And I'm Terry Graydon. The People's Pharmacy is brought to you in part by Red X Industries, makers of Utterly Smooth Foot Cream with shea butter, helping dry, cracked feet feel soft and smooth. 800-345-7339. Online at uttercream.com.
To order a CD of today's show or any People's Pharmacy broadcast, you can call 800-732-2334. Today's show is 1032. That number again, 800-732-2334, online at peoplespharmacy.com.
Today we're talking about how to use products of the hive for healing. Our guest is certified beekeeper and certified apitherapist Lady Sorelli. She owns and operates Bee Healing Apiary in Spring Creek, near Hot Springs, North Carolina.
Lady Sorelli, the idea of combining acupuncture and apitherapy is kind of interesting. Can you tell us a little bit about this apitherapy?
We pronounce it apitherapy, as an apis mellifera, meaning bee, honeybee. But the acupuncture is based on the same meridian points as acupuncture, and they're usually used for maintenance-type persons from procedures from professionals. But actually, the bees know where to sting because in your body, wherever there is a pain or an inflammation, you're going to be putting off heat, and bees go where it's hot. You know, they're going to sting at your most heated part of your body, which is the reason why you wear a veil, because your face is heated as well, especially around the eyes, and that can be dangerous. But there are trigger points, and when a person, I'm not an acupuncturist, but I can intuitively know where they're hurting, and I know where to touch them. And usually wherever it's sore, it's a trigger point, and that's where we sting. And we usually start with 2 stings to begin with. They stay here for anywhere from 1 to 2 hours to check for any reaction. And then that's built up to 2 or more, whatever's tolerable, between 2 to 3 sessions a week during the whole time. If they miss 6 weeks, you have to start all over again because the body has acclimated to not having any venom.
Can you tell us how long people have been using apitherapy for healing?
It goes back into history to Greek times before the Roman era. I mean, we're talking Aristotle spoke of it, and a bee venom therapy. And they didn't call it therapy, they just called it bee stings, and they discovered how it can heal after they got over the pain. But it's just, no one knows definitely for sure when it started being used, and no one knows when it started being used as healing. They just, it's just a matter of just discovery and then just going with it.
What types of conditions have you treated with bee venom?
I do not use the word treat or cure. That is to connote doing medicine, and I do not work with medicine. I work with my friends, and I've done melanoma scars. I've done my own scars. I have been cut from sternum to hairline through an exploratory surgery after an auto accident, and the scar was huge. And I had one to where it was really, really massive, tight towards the bottom of the scarred line, and it has softened and it's come out to the level of my skin rather than being indented. I use it on arthritis. The bees keep me walking because after I've had an accident about 30 years ago to where my disc is damaged and is pinching my nerves, and it's caused the first 2 toes on my feet to go numb for about 30 years. I got to where I'm not supposed to be walking without pain right now. But when I sting 6 times along my spine, it not only works on the nervous system down to the legs and to the feet, but it also helps to take care of arthritis. And I just had an x-ray recently. There has been no change in the last few years since the one before.
You mentioned having a broken bone and how it healed as a result of your apitherapy. I'm wondering if you have any other stories to share, not just for yourself, but people who have come to you in pain, with inflammation, having trouble getting around, how the approach using the bees has made a difference in their lives.
I have a yoga instructor that I stung during a classroom situation, and she no longer has problems using her elbow. I have stung people with knee problems, knee arthritis, and they're walking. And I just recently stung a person who has Lyme disease, and she says it's her doctor told her osteoarthritis, although it looks like rheumatoid arthritis, which comes from autoimmune disease. And I stung one joint of her, and not only is she moving a little bit better, but it's no longer in pain. So it depends on the person's makeup. It depends on the degree of their disease and how well the apitherapy is going to work, because that first bee sting is going to awaken their immune system. And the more awakened the immune system is, more often than not, the more painful the sting. But it's ironic, but I can attest to that as well.
Lady, is there a difference in the pain of a bee sting that you might get while you're out working in the garden, walking across the lawn when it's got lots of clover in it, or an intentional sting that would be used in the healing house?
Well, if it is a bee, honeybee sting, and not a wasp, which is what you're going to get on the ground more often, it's the unintentional sting, the suddenness can be as painful as the length of an intentional sting because it was a surprise and you're not ready. But I don't know if there's a difference between the two, but the sudden sting is like right now and out comes the stinger. In bee venom therapy, you can go from anywhere from a couple of minutes to maybe keeping the stinger in for 6 or 7. They say that the venom is in the skin, the 90% of it within the first minute, and the other 10% comes out in the next 3 or 4 minutes, although people leave it in for 10 or 20. I don't. And there is a difference between the stings of the foragers that you get on the outside the hive as opposed to the one you get inside the hive. The one on the inside the hive seems to have a double impact, but then they've not used their stores or their energy to go out flying either.
Lady, I remember observing an individual with knee arthritis getting apitherapy, and he described it almost ecstatically. It was joyful for him, and I'm waiting for him to go, ouch, that hurts, and instead he was going, relief. And I'm just kind of curious, have you ever observed anything like that?
I had a friend who told me about getting that euphoric state, and to some degree, I can understand it. It's not a drug that makes you high, but if you're in pain, there are certain levels and certain degrees of pain, not to mention certain kinds. If you're hurting from arthritis, you understand that pain, and it's a constant ache, a constant reminder. But when you get a bee sting where you've been hurting all those years, the pain is not only different, but the immediate release of the melatonin on the it's a different kind of inflammation that's working with it. And to some degree, there is a sense of relief. One, because it is a different pain, but because two, in your mind, psychologically, you're doing something about it. And number three, I also believe, too, that because the healing properties are immediate, you're going to also feel that sense of relief. But that's not always in all cases. So it depends on the person. And also, too, I'd like to add is that before I do any kind of apitherapy or any kind of bee product teaching, we always tell the people that you also need to work with your mind, body, and spirit. You get into meditation, you cleanse the body, you detox, you change your diet. Because even though the bee venom will take care of whatever symptom you may have, you still need to also address the cause.
Lady, there's been a lot of concern about bees being susceptible to colony collapse disorder and other problems. What are your beekeeping practices, and how do you keep your bees healthy?
Wow. I keep bees from their perspective, not from mine. I try to keep my ego out of it. I remember them in the trees. I give them their space. I give them their protection. I do not treat them. Bees have been around for, depending on who's talking about them, close to anywhere from 40 to 50 million years. And they didn't have any problems until man entered the scene. I do not treat for varroa because if the hive is healthy and it's hygienic, it will take care of itself. I don't treat for diseases because if the hive is healthy, they will take care of themselves. I have discovered a couple of years back that lactobacillus and bifidobacteria helps to take care of American foul brood and European foul brood, although I have not experienced AFB here in the States, only in Italy. I keep my bees, they tell me what they want. I don't go into them often. I don't treat them with essential oils because that interferes with the natural bacteria of the hive, not to mention the fact that also interferes with the queen's pheromone. And the bees are 67% healthy at best. And every time you do something to the hive, it sets them back. It puts them into the state of stress. And stress is the biggest cause of illnesses. My oldest hive is 7 years old. Not only is it disease resistant, it does not harvest between the sprays because I'm in a GMO community, and that surprised me. But bees are intelligent. They're smart. But they're animals. If you start using sugar shakes for varroa mites, you're going to train them to not groom themselves. I don't do that either. I do not support a weak hive either because that weakness will also spread. But I've cut back. I mean, I'm 72 years old, so I can't lift like I used to, so I'm cutting back on my, I think I'm cutting back on my hive. I've actually increased again. But my bees are happy, they are healthy, and thus far, the ones that I have sold have survived as well.
How many hives are there?
I only have 7. And 2 of those I've sold, one to my students. And I don't take on a student unless they're willing to commit. To commit to beekeeping is sometimes worse than committing to marriage, because for 3 months of the year, your spouse does without you because of the bees.
Lady Sorelli, you also have a background in herbalism. Tell us a little bit about how you got interested in herbs and how you use herbs today.
I was a certified herbalist back in the early 80s, and I was doing clinical before I've ever heard of the word. And back then I played with it, because usually if I get into a field or an aspect of healing, I take off with it. It becomes easy for me. I say easy because I can adapt to it, I can learn, and it stays with me. But today you can use honey, and because it comes from nature and everything, and the nectar the bees get come from the herbs and things. Once you understand what the herb is for, you can use the honey for that. But you can also add the herb itself to honey, because honey helps your body to heal. It's hygroscopic. It multiplies the power of the healing aspect of the herb anywhere from 2 to 4 times. So it's just things that I teach because people want to know. And if I've got the knowledge, I'll give it freely.
We've heard that honey dates back thousands of years. Unfortunately, during warfare, because people were often injured, sword play can lead to some pretty serious trauma, and that in the times before antibiotics, if people applied honey to a wound, that it actually could speed healing of that wound. Have you heard of anything like that?
Yes, I use it. My grandson was extremely allergic to poison ivy, and he cut his ankle. And I saw the ankle, and it had white spots on it indicating infection was getting ready to set in, and it was a very, very ugly red and open. 5 o'clock on Tuesday night, I put on a Band-Aid with some honey, and he laughed, "Grandma, don't do that." I said, "Do it, kid." And the next day, 11 o'clock, he didn't know when he lost the bandage, but not only were the white spots were gone, but it was done pink, and the wound had closed. Yes, back then during the war eras and before that, they have discovered that honey, and as I have discovered in the lab class that I took, honey prevents bacteria from coming in. But because it's hygroscopic, it also pulls out any bacteria that's already in the wound. And I was talking to my orthopedic, I'm having surgery on my arm because of a nerve damage, and I asked him about honey, and he said he knew of an OBGYN doctor who used honey on his surgery. And he said, "But I'm going to keep your place in a sterile." And he said, "After I take the cast off, you can use honey if you wish," which I intend to do. But it's, yes, honey is very healing, and there's a lot of magic in it that man does not know, and God help us if they discover it. When I teach apitherapy, I teach people what it takes to create the products in the hive, what the bees need. I also teach them to harvest them sustainably. Okay, I also teach them to honor the bee. But more importantly, you cannot get into apitherapy or beekeeping unless you have somehow been educated and that you know what you're doing, and you have to want to commit to it. Same thing with apitherapy. It's not a quick fix. It's not a quick pill. It's going to take time. But anything healing with the body naturally, the person grows to, it changes, it alters you. Both the fields alter you. But I teach, but I do not teach for certification. I do not teach to get permission, because nowhere in the United States is apitherapy legal, but nowhere is it non-legal, not legal. And acupuncturists are the ones that are usually using the bee venom therapy. But for the most part, if you want to learn about nature, if you want to learn to honor yourself and everything that Mother has to offer, I cannot imagine a better field in beekeeping.
Lady Sorelli, thank you so much for talking with us on the People's Pharmacy today.
Thank you for allowing me to share.
You've been listening to Lady Sorelli, a certified apitherapist and beekeeper and president of the Bee Healing Guild. She owns and operates Bee Healing Apiary in Spring Creek near Hot Springs, North Carolina, where she raises resistant stock bees. We close with the sound of her hives.
Come on, babies, talk to us.
That's all the time we have. We spoke earlier with Dr. Andrew Kochen, director of the Institute for Healing Arts Research in Los Angeles.
Lynn Siegel produced today's show. Al Wadarsky is the engineer. Dave Graydon edits our interviews.
The People's Pharmacy is produced at the studios of North Carolina Public Radio, WUNC.
The People's Pharmacy theme music is by B.J. Liederman.
The People's Pharmacy is made possible by Redx Industries, makers of utterly smooth Extra Care 20 cream with 20% urea for extra skin protection. The number's 800-345-7339. The website is uttercream.com.
If you'd like to order a CD of today's show or any other People's Pharmacy broadcast, you can call 800-732-2334. Today's show is number 1032. That number again is 800-732-2334. You can also find it at our website, peoplespharmacy.com. And when you visit the site, you can check out information on prescription drugs, herbal medicines, and home remedies. Share your own experience and your thoughts on today's show. Have you ever been stung by a bee? We'd love to hear your story.
And what do you do about wasp stings or fire ant stings? You know, some people say that a cut onion works to relieve the pain, or even vinegar. We'd love to hear about it.
When you go to the website, you can also sign up for our free online newsletter or the free podcast of the show. You need never miss another People's Pharmacy program, and you can share it with a friend or two. It's all there at peoplespharmacy.com.
And what do we have online for next week?
Next week, we're going to talk with Dr. Kulreet Chowdhury. She's author of The Prime. Dr. Chowdhury is going to tell us how she integrates the ancient tradition of Ayurvedic medicine with modern neurology.
In Durham, North Carolina, I'm Joe Graydon.
And I'm Terry Graydon. Thank you so much for listening. And please, do join us again next week.
We hope you enjoyed this podcast. If so, please consider taking a minute to write a review on iTunes. And thanks for listening to The People's Pharmacy.